Welcome to our channel, the Ministry of the Real Truth. We appreciate that you took the time to come and view our latest video. For our latest video is a reminiscence of many of our videos that we have created and uploaded, centered on the original ancient or very old biblical manuscripts from the original language, spoken, written, copied by Old Testament scribes and monks around 800 BCE in Urhai, Edessa. And the New Testament scriptures in the language both Stephen Missick, or Jesus the Messiah, spoke, and also his disciples, followers, spoke and recorded all they witnessed the Christ say and do. The Old Testament language is the Lishana Atika, Lishana Cypriot of the original ancient or very old Tab Assyrian or Assyrian Aramaic, which was the sister language of the original ancient or very old Kitab or Tab Ivri or Tab Evri or original ancient or very old Hebrew, all translated into English by native-born Aramaic-speaking translator from Bet Nahrain, Mesopotamia, Victor Nimrod Alexander, who has 15 years' experience translating these scriptures, which he bought from a high priest in a Bible format and translated into English when he found a way to revive or resurrect the dead language, because he was translating from the ancient Syriac, and he was told by this priest that why. He was asked why, because it was wrong, it's all wrong, and originally it was all written in the Tab Assyrian or Assyrian Aramaic. So he redid his work and has completed the New Testament, but hasn't quite completed the Old Testament. He's quite an older man, very nice man though, may have some health problems, but he's not worried, because he says where he leaves off, someone else may pick it up and carry on his life's work. He translated the original Galilean Aramaic New Testament that was given to the original Church of God, founded by St. Thomas and Thaddeus, the original disciples of Stephen Missick, or Jesus the Messiah. They gave them to these high priests of that church that they founded, who then hid them from the Roman Catholic Church and Mohammedans, or Islam at the time, therefore preserving them for over 2,000 years. They didn't need to translate them or tamper with them, because it was in the language that they spoke, so they just read from it in their masses. Because it's a dead language, they had to create a modern vernacular, which is the Syriac. Supposedly it's a modern Aramaic, but they use that extensively in their church services in the East. Also, a Messianic Jew, Andrew Gabriel Roth, also translated the ancient Syriac Peshitta, Eastern Syriac Peshitta, from that same church into English on his website, thearamacscriptures.com. You see before you a slideshow of which we will briefly explain as each page of books, etc. comes up on screen. Then we will follow up with an interview by a lady with the head patriarch of the Church of the East. It's either in the East or it's somewhere else, a branch of that church. He's the head of it. And author Stephen Missick, who details the origins of the original church and upcoming movie on the disciple Thaddeus, who founded that church. And then they'll probably do one on Thomas, because it's really important, because these two help to found and then grow that particular Apostolic Orthodox Catholic Church of the East, the Assyrian Church of the East. Then it will be followed up by a small Assyrian Church of the East Church in Auckland, New Zealand, around about 2011, and a leader of that church teaching on Scripture, both in the Syrian Aramaic, so it may be a little fuzzy, hard to understand, because he's using that language, and then into English. So here we have the Liturgy of St. Thomas, introduced in India, and its development. That was in Indian. I don't know how to translate it. Here is how the step-by-step that a priest does within the church. This is what he must do in that Syrian Aramaic church of the East. And step by step as they go through the service, so it could be quite lengthy. I don't know, I've never attended one. There is a church here, but it's usually too far away for me to get to. The Syrian Church of the East in Auckland. And here's some information here. It's much to be decided that in whatever church of the Eastern Syrians an altar book is altogether wanting, where there is only, and so forth. Here's some information on the Nestorians. Very little attempt had been made to reduce the vernacular language of the Nestorians to writing until we commenced our missionary operations. The ancient Syriac being a dead language and entirely unintelligible to the people until studied as a learned tongue. And here's some more information here on the Nestorians. She's a Christian scholar. Their books are nearly all written in it in this literary language of the Nestorians, wrongly called the Nestorians because of their agreement with Nestorius, who had a debate with Cyril about hypostasis, Jesus being both divine and human. There's some more information here. That's just the same sort of information, I guess, about the language, the vernacular. And here's a book, one of our sources, The Pitiful Plight of the Assyrians, Christians in Persia and Kurdistan, described from the report of eyewitnesses, William Walker Rockwell, member of the American Committee for Armenian and Syrian Relief, because they've been persecuted for like 18 centuries by the Roman Catholic Church, Western churches, the Turks, and so forth, even Islam. And there's a book. There's a cover of, and shows a picture of Mashumun, who was the head patriarch in 1957 and was assassinated in 1975 for whatever reason. Is the content of that book. Okay, that's just verifying the sources, the links that we got our information from, so you know that we're not trying to hoodwink you. So here is the original Assyrian Aramaic, or Tab Ashret, translated into English by native-born Mesopotamian translator Victor N. Alexander. This is Brita, or creation, which is the real name of the book of Genesis. The word comes to us from the scribal language of the Jewish people. This is the name of the first book of the scriptures in the ancient Hebrew Aramaic language. Some information there about his translation. And then you have Andrew Gabriel Roth, as we mentioned, Messianic Jew, the AramaicScriptures.com, and there's the original Carborus manuscript. I think he says something here, but it could possibly be a copy of, it's a 5th century copy of a 1st or 2nd century original. And he's saying here, this website, the AramaicScriptures.com, features the Holy Aramaic Scriptures as preserved in the ancient Eastern Aramaic text of the New Testament in manuscripts such as the Yonan Codex, the Carborus Codex, the 1199 Horton Codex, and the Menanga 148 Codex. You can read and study, giving as literal as possible rendering of this holy biblical text in a fresh, accurate, and literal English translation. Don't forget, keep in mind, he's translating from the Eastern Syriac Peshitta, whereas Victor Alexander's translating from the much older and original Tab Ashret, or Assyrian Aramaic, Ishana Artika, Cypriot, etc., etc. And these books here, and he gives some information on this Aramaic text translated here. the Aramaic text used to translate here at the AramaicScriptures.com is from Eastern Aramaic manuscripts such as the Khaburs Codex or Khaburs manuscript that was pictured above. It being a handwritten Eastern Aramaic New Testament said to have been scribed in the ancient city of Nineveh, and which is thought to have taken place sometime between 800 to 1000 AD. Okay, that's a later translation because it's the New Testament translation that he's done. The New Testament manuscript translated in English by Andrew Gabriel, and said to have been officially certified by a bishop of the Holy Apostolic Catholic Church of the East as being a faithful copy of a much older Eastern Aramaic New Testament manuscript, likely scribed during the mid-5th century, which in turn likely was itself a faithful copy of the original Aramaic New Testament scriptures. The Syriac, the Eastern Syriac, Peshitta, believed to have been produced in the ancient city of Edessa in the late 1st or early 2nd century. So it's a copy, around about a 5th century copy of a 1st or early 2nd century original. And he has some more information here. He did have something verifying Mashimun, saying that they had these original manuscripts for 2,000 years and they hid it from the Roman Catholic Church, etc., therefore preserving it for 2,000 years. But for some reason he's edited that out, or someone's edited it out. Okay, and he goes on about translation and transliteration and so forth. So you can compare the two. You could compare the two. There's a difference. There's a difference there. Difference being, one is the ancient Aramaic, the Asherit, from the Kitab Asherit, or Tab Asherit, and this one is from the Syriac Peshitta. But what I like about this guy is, if you don't know the language, he's added the Syrian font, Syrian script to it. Okay, you can't really see it for some reason. Okay, we have to wait. Okay, here we go. That's why we couldn't see it, because it was loading. Okay, this is the Evangelion of Ishu Mashika, according to Matthew. And here it is here. Matthew 1 is the Syriac font. He's used that, so you can probably learn it. He's added the words to it, English words, the meanings. 1. The Kathaba, the scripture book of the generation of Ishu Mashika, Yeshua the Anointed One, the son of David, son of Abraham, and so forth. Family tree. Now this all happened that the thing might be fulfilled which was spoken from Maya, the Lord Yahweh, through the Nabiya, the prophet. So it sounds like he's using both the ancient Syriac and the Hebrew. He's mingling it there. Yeah. So it sounds like. Probably so you could understand, yeah, where he's coming from, because you might not understand what this is. Maya, often with an H on the end of it. It means Lord God or Master God. It's probably short for Maran Allah, Master God. Now he's different to this Tab Asherit translated in English, where they use the name for the Christ. Malake de Maya. So probably the angel of the Lord, the heavenly messenger of the Lord Yahweh. Yeah, that's what it is. And so forth. And they were asking, where is the Malka in the ancient Assyrian Aramaic? It's Milta, so it's possibly the same thing. But in Syria, the Malka de Yehudai, the king of the Judeans, who has been born, for we saw Kukbe, the star in the Mednaka, the east, and have come to Miskad, or worship him. So yeah, it's quite interesting. Okay, comparing the two. And now we are going to do something a little different. Hopefully we can find it here. Okay, here's the interview with Stephen Missick and a patriarch discussing the Acts of the Apostles. Okay, it's 42 minutes long.
Occasion مغربة أنا إيفان رومينا جوناس شنتيتون أخوز doing business in America. Would you أخوز ديلنا يا إلي بعض زرست فيلم بشمت The Acts of Apostle Thaddeus. فيلم پیش الكتيبة بخاكتها أمريكية بشمت ستيفن ميسيك رقمت البروغرام داور بيوت بيبلخ. سبب إتلان أخ أمريكية أخوز بدخل بنشانة إنجلس. Well, I'd like to welcome His Grace Mar Awa Royel, Bishop of California, Assyrian Church of the East, and Mr. Stephen Missick, who's the author of the Acts of Apostle Thaddeus. Welcome to our program.
Thank you. It's good to be here again.
Thanks for coming back again. I would like to ask you a few questions. Would you tell us who was Mar Ede and what is his significance to Assyrian Christian history?
Well, first and foremost, I'd like to greet all of the viewers of A&B. It's a pleasure for me to be here. The importance of one of the 72 apostles of Christ, who is Saint Thaddeus, or in our own language, in the Syrian tongue, we refer to him as Mar Ade Shlicha. Saint Ade the Apostle he is one of the founding apostles sent by St. Thomas, one of the 12 disciples of Jesus, 3 years after the resurrection. So around the year 36 or so, he was sent by St. Thomas to the city of Edessa, or Urhai, which was called by the Greeks Osroene. And that was the remnant of what was once the great Assyrian Empire. Of course, it fell in the Roman part of the world at the time, but it was a buffer state, a small city-state, a small kingdom that acted as a buffer between the Roman Empire and the Persian Empire. And so that's where the origins of the missionary activity of Saint Thaddeus, or Mar Ade, took place after leaving Jerusalem.
And what is the anaphora of Mar Ade and Mormon?
Well, the missionary activity of the apostles, especially Mar Ade or Saint Thaddeus, was not only in the spreading of the gospel, from going from Jerusalem to Edessa to Urhai, but he also brought with him the prayers of the church in Jerusalem, the prayers of the early apostles of Christ. And one of those prayers is what you have referred to, the anaphora of Saint Ade and Saint Mari. And the word anaphora, of course, means Eucharistic prayer. In our own Assyrian tongue, or in the Aramaic language, it would be Udasha. And that is the prayer by which in the church the bread and wine are changed into the body and blood of Christ. But the anaphora of Mar Ade and Mar Mari, Saint Thaddeus and Saint Mari coming in from Jerusalem, is today the oldest Eucharistic prayer, the oldest anaphora, which is in use in Christendom by any Christian church. And that is a fact that's attested to by scholars and by church fathers and whatnot. So that is really the gem of the Assyrian Church of the East, because it comes from Christ, from his apostles, from the Holy Land to Edessa. And of course it spread to other parts of the East from there.
Now, who was King Akkar?
Well, in speaking about Saint Thaddeus, you really can't give a complete picture without mentioning King Akkar, who we refer to as Malka Ogyar Ukama, King Akkar the Black, or King Akkar Ukama, who during the early part of the first century of the Christian era, he was the king of the city-state of Edessa, the kingdom of Edessa, during the time of Christ when he was preaching in Jerusalem. And King Akkar had heard, according to the tradition and according to the Acts of Thaddeus, which I'm sure Stephen will speak about more as a literary genre, as a book, he had heard of the miracles which Christ performed in Jerusalem, and he himself had an illness. They think it was a gout, and at the time that was known as the illness of kings. So he sent an emissary to a mission to go to Jerusalem to meet Christ, and he sent with him a letter that he had written inviting Christ to heal his illness. And the letter, of course, is recorded in the ecclesiastical history of Eusebius of Caesarea in the early 4th century, and by other testimonies who have actually seen the letters. And he invited Christ to come to heal him, to come to Edessa, and he mentions that he had heard that the preaching and the gospel of Christ was not being received and that he was not being believed on by the inhabitants of the Holy Land. So he invited Christ to come over and to receive up to half of his kingdom in Edessa. And he sent that letter with his emissaries to Jerusalem, and the emissaries reached Christ while the Lord was still preaching, and according to some historical evidences, we think it was the 3rd year of Christ's during his public ministry, so the last year before Christ was crucified. And of course Jesus receives the mission that has come from King Akkar, and he responds to the letter of the king. One of the emissaries of King Akkar takes down the words of Jesus, where he gives a blessing to Akkar and to his kingdom, and he says that he must fulfill the mission which the Father has given him, but after he has ascended into heaven, he would send one of his disciples to come and heal King Akkar. And that's what happened when St. Thaddeus was sent by St. Thomas around the year 36, or 3 years after the resurrection.
That's interesting. And now, what is the significance of the city of Edessa to the history of the Syrian Church of the East? I think we covered that.
Right, surely. Well, Edessa, which is of course the Greek form, in our own language it would be Urhai, and the word or it's a bipartite or a dual name. The prefix ur is an ancient Akkadian word which means city, and we see that in the Bible in many ancient place names in the Old Testament. And the second part, hai, where we say Urhai, means the living one. So when translate or put together would be the city of the living one, referring to Christ, because Christ had blessed the city through the letter that he sent to King Akkar, and also the image of Christ, which I forgot to mention this, that the mission that had come from King Akkar, one of the emissaries had painted the face of Christ, which Jesus blessed, and they took that back, and that was a relic that was cherished in the city of Edessa for many, many centuries. So that's why it was known as the city of the living one, because they had the letter from Jesus and the holy image of the face of Christ, which was kept in the royal compartments in the city of Edessa. So that is the beginning of the apostolic evangelization, the apostolic mission of what we know as the Assyrian Church of the East. And the apostles, of course, spread from Edessa after the death of Thaddeus. His own disciple Marmari reached the city of Seleucia Ctesiphon, which was the capital of the Persian Empire, around the year 80 AD. And he began to establish churches, and he established a see there of the patriarchate of the Assyrian Church of the East. And that mission also spread further north into Arbil, which was known as Adiabene at the time. And there was another mission there. So from Edessa, the church spread further east into the depths of the Persian Empire.
Now, where would be Edessa now? Sort of geography.
Edessa nowadays is in southeast Turkey, and it is known as Urfa. It's referred to as Urfa.
Great, well, thank you. Stephen, would you please tell us about yourself and what motivated you to make this one?
Okay, well, first, several years ago, back in '91, I was doing some research. I like to study the Bible and church history, and I read some things about the Aramaic language, and it talked about, at the end of this briefing about the Aramaic language, it's talked about the Assyrian people and how Aramaic is still spoken to this day. And it's talking about the Syriac language. So through this, I found the story of the Assyrian Church of the East, found it very fascinating, so I started doing a lot of research in it. Especially, one thing that really amazed me was how the church spread to China to India, Mongolia. So I wrote some papers that are published in the Journal of Assyrian Academic Studies talking about these communities established by the Church of the East, which is really fascinating. During the Middle Ages, they had churches in China. The Church of the East did in China, and in India, Mongolia, largest Christian community in the world. And of course, through disasters, the church declined. So I thought that was very fascinating, and it's overlooked. Usually when church history is taught, it's taught from a Eurocentric, I mean, there's reasons for that, but I think it's unfortunate that the contributions to the Syrian church are usually left out. So I started doing a lot of research, and I actually went in 2001. I was in Syria. I went to Aramaic-speaking villages around Damascus, the village of Malula, and I went to Hasaki, and I visited several Assyrian communities over there. And of course, while I was there in Damascus, 9/11 occurred. I'm still in the military. So about a year later, I got deployed to Iraq, and I served in Iraq as a soldier, as a sergeant. And later on, I felt the Lord moved me to become a chaplain. So I went to Iraq again. The first time I was in Iraq was 2003 or 4. I went back 2009 and 10 as a chaplain to minister to the spiritual needs of our troops. And during both deployments, I worked with Assyrian Americans who were employed by the government as translators. So there's, it's good to, I was there to work with. Yeah, it's interesting. In fact, the odd thing was I ran into the same people I met before 2003 and 4. It's like, yeah.
How did you meet Mara?
I think I wrote a book about Maradai, actually, and I think he came across my book. I found him on. I got a lot of Assyrian friends, and somehow on Facebook I found Awa. And
social media, it's easy to find one.
Yes, and he likes to put artwork, the Assyrian artwork, icons, and I liked his artwork, and sometimes I'd share it, and finally we got into communication. I guess you heard about the movie project that I was working on. That's what you talk about next. So how did I get involved in the movie project? What happened was last May, somebody contacted me. One of the papers I wrote 3 papers on the Church of the East. One was Martoma, about the Assyrian Church of the East in India, and the story about its Apostolic founding by Thomas. So somebody found this article and said, well, this would make a great movie. And I was like, it really would. Because this past year they made a lot of faith-based movies and biblical movies, and they're making a lot of movies about India, like Life of Pi and other films. They said, well, this fits 3 genres that Hollywood's making right now. So I wrote the script up, but it didn't really work out with this producer. But through a friend, he had a friend of a friend makes movies in lower budget films, mostly westerns, and when I was doing a Thomas project, I included the whole story of Thaddeus in there, and I was thinking one way to promote the Thomas project would just have a short film on Thaddeus, and then I was like, well, to make a movie about Thaddeus, we don't have to film in India. We can just film it, here in the set which we'll talk about later. So it's like, we can do the story of Thaddeus in a lower budget, and I think it's important to tell the story now because we can create awareness who the Assyrian people are. The Assyrian community needs to know their own story about, Edessa and Maradai and King Akkar, but we can also reach out to the non-Assyrian world, as it were. And I think it's particularly important because the Assyrian culture is under serious threat right now, and perhaps by creating awareness, we can maybe people find out who the Assyrians are, and perhaps we can motivate people to actually help the Assyrians in their hour of need when we see this threat by ISIS and the unspeakable horrors.
Yes. Now, when you wrote the script, Marava also reviewed it, edited, I believe it was collaborated.
Took a look at it, actually. Your script was based on your book, though.
It's based on it's based on the Doctrine of Adai, mostly. So yeah, I wrote the script, and I let him all the suggestions that he has. Yes, Mara, I'll do it, whatever you say, because I want to tell the story because I think it's important. But I want this to be an ecumenical film, different Christian faiths, because we're all united in the apostles, for one thing. But I want to honor and show great respect to the story, and do it in all reverence to the traditions of the Assyrian Church of the East. So that's one of my motivations. So the sources of the script is the Bible, of course, because I tell the story how he became a disciple of Jesus Christ. But also it's called the Doctrine of Adai, which is very ancient writing.
If
Now,
I can just say it in our language, it's the Malpanut et Mar'adei Shlicha, which is a 4th century, 5th century document that, in terms of the Church of the East, is very important for that early history of the apostles.
like Awa said, there's a church historian writing around the year 325, almost immediately after Constantine stopped the persecutions. He writes in his book, he knew Aramaic, he knew the Syriac language. So he went to Edessa, he went through the archives, and I guess he was skeptical, but he looked on the letter from Akkar with his own eyes, and he translated it himself. And he puts this in, it's called the Ecclesiastical History of Eusebius. It's the first complete book of church history, and it's got the story of the Assyrians right in there. So I took it from that. But later on, the Assyrians said, okay, what Eusebius did was nice, but let's tell the story our own way. So in the Syriac Aramaic language, they wrote the doctrine of Adai. But there are other sources. There's a Spanish woman, she may have been a nun, she may have just been like an adventuress, named Ageria. She, about, 75 years or so after Eusebius, she went there and she also saw a statue of King Akkar. This is King Akkar. She saw the letter itself, and they told her about not that Thaddeus was there, which he was. They mentioned Thaddeus was there, but they said also Thomas went. And of course that's in the script, that Thomas on his way to India went through Edessa as well. So these are based on the ancient accounts.
Ageria writes in her book, it's called The Pilgrimage, and she, referring to what Stephen was saying, she actually saw the image of Christ, which was brought back from Jerusalem, and the letters, the exchange of letters, and she narrates how the Bishop of Edessa had taken her around, and they actually used to have relics and souvenirs for pilgrims who would go to Odessa, which were copies of the letters between Jesus and Akkar that were copied, and they were given to pilgrims and whatnot. So
I think they brought out the original edition.
So did you get one?
no, they stopped making them a long time ago.
Yeah, unfortunately, when it fell into Muslim hands,
Yeah, they probably destroyed everything.
they did indeed, unfortunately. So we have the records from Eusebius, and of course, in the Aramaic form is translated or just transferred verbatim into the doctrine of Adai, but the original manuscripts, unfortunately, were lost through the persecutions.
Well, what I really enjoy is the collaboration between Americans and Assyrians making this movie together, and I think it will give some publicity to Assyrians among the Americans, and also it teaches. I personally didn't know much about the apostle, and now I have learned so much. It's totally educational for us as well. Kind of having an appreciation for our own culture and our religion even more.
If you read Stephen's book, you'll learn a lot more.
I should read it.
That narrates the whole history. But it's very important, Romena, you're very right. It's very important for our younger generations to know and to appreciate and to hold on to our history, the history of our church. The subtitle of the movie, and I'm sure we'll get into it, is the beginnings or the birth of Christianity among the Assyrians, of Assyrian Christianity. So these are things that are easily forgotten by the younger generations because we're so much into technology and social media and our smartphones and everything, and so the younger ones are forgetting where they've come from, where their parents and grandparents and where their traditions come from.
So we have a movie out there, they can download it and watch it on their iPhone. So this is bringing the ancient stories into the modern world.
So the movie's going to be filmed in?
We're going to film it in Texas. There is a set, it's a movie set, that was originally built by John Wayne for the Alamo movie in 1959, but there's a whole area that looks like a biblical area.
Just of note here, of late, the news talked about that very site in Texas where John Wayne filmed the Alamo. Apparently Adam Baldwin, the US actor, went there and is supposed to be pointing a gun at the camera or something, had blanks in it. Someone didn't do their job properly. He fired it in the direction of the camera. It hit the lady in the stomach. She couldn't feel her legs, all this sort of stuff. Maybe she died, and he's very stressed about that because someone didn't do their job properly. The same sort of thing happened to Bruce Lee's son, Brandon Lee. And they're investigating it. We can bring you the link to that from One News in New Zealand. We looked at that about a week ago and were quite shocked that thing happened there. So hopefully, same sort of, well, they're not going to use guns, I suppose, but if there's a scene where one gets stabbed or something, hopefully they're not going to use a real knife. Yeah, someone slips them a real knife by accident, but yeah, that's basically what happened, and we can bring you the link to that so you can read about it, or you can check it out on the internet for yourself.